Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Signals Notebook Connect community series in 2024. My name is Diana Tran. I am the Senior Product Marketing Specialist here at Brevity Signals and will be your moderator for this session. This ongoing Signals Notebook community series will be an opportunity for you to learn about newly added Signals Notebook functionalities and hear how others are using Signals Notebook to improve productivity and data transparency through enhanced collaboration. As always, we want to hear from you. If you have any suggestions on topics for our upcoming Connect, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'll input my email in the open chat on the right-hand side. This Connect will focus on driving innovation in Signals Notebook with our amazing customer, Eli Lilly, who will discuss about their company success story and with our external actions and API. Just to let you know, all sessions are recorded and available for streaming at revolutionize.com. A couple of quick housekeeping reminders before we start. We will have ample time at the end for questions, so please submit your questions through the question box located on the right-hand side of your screen. Future dates for our Signals Notebook Connect for 2024 have been shared along with this registration, so I hope you will join us for future program scheduled for October 2nd. More details to come in the upcoming weeks. Now let's dive into it. Overall, today we will focus on fundamentals of external actions and APIs, Eli Lilly's implementation, Signals Notebook integrations, GXP integration considerations, and of course, a Q&A session. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers for today's webinar. Our first speaker is Colin Fife. Colin joined Brevity Signals in May of last year to expand our developer relationships. He's creating a customer-friendly documentation defining best practices and providing practical examples to customers. Colin spent a decade as a software engineer for PayPal before moving into product management with an ISP. Going on to our next speaker, Doug Stack. Doug is a fairly recent addition to the R&D IT team. He has been with Lilly for 30 years and with the first 28 years spent in discovery chemistry as an organic medicinal chemist. During this time, he contributed to projects across all therapeutic areas, using automation extensively, and served as the business SME for electronic notebooks. Doug brought his lab knowledge into the IT area in 2022 and made immediate impact by leading fast and successful implementation of Signals Notebook World Discovery-wide. He continues to support multiple scientific software solutions and is actively engaged in improving Signals offering for his customers. Our last speaker for today is Alicia Hargraves. Alicia is a senior IT manager at Eli Lilly, supporting several electronic lab notebooks as technical subject matter expert, TSME, for Lilly Research Laboratories. She has been with Eli Lilly for 9 years, managing the lifecycle of laboratory information systems across research and manufacturing and quality organizations. Prior to Lilly, she worked as a software engineer building LIMS for laboratories across the globe. Alicia has a bachelor's in computer science from Florida A&M University. She enjoys playing board video games with her family, trying new foods, and drawing in their spare time. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Colin to begin our session for today.
Thanks, Diana. So as mentioned, I'm going to be going over the fundamentals of both external actions, which Eli Lilly will use heavily in their demo. And then I will also just discuss all the various building blocks around our integration strategies. So next slide, please. The general principles of our integrations is that they should be simple. We have well-defined APIs and documentation to support those APIs so that they are easy to use. They are supportable. They depend, no matter the complexity of the action, we want to make sure that it is reliable and it should not have any conflict within integrating with the app, integrating with the notebook. Beyond that, we want to make sure we don't break things as we update them. We have versioned APIs in case of any breaking changes, and we attempt to always relay any upcoming changes that may impact our customers' existing integrations ahead of them. Certainly, we want to always be looking at more and more ways to improve our integration capabilities, how we can get better ways to assist our customers with their integrations, how they extract and input data, and any other things that the customer needs to do to extend the power of Signals Notebook. And lastly, we use a couple standards throughout our APIs. Most importantly, the JSON API standard. This defines how you can expect requests and responses coming from our APIs and is used throughout all of our APIs within Signals. There's also a few others in there. We also support SCIM for identity management and using the SCIM 2.0 standard. Next slide, please. So the core components, what I like to consider the building blocks of all integrations with Revity, with Notebook, is our REST APIs, which we'll go into, and I'll go into each of these a little bit more in detail after this, but they are the REST APIs. This is these are standard RESTful APIs designed with that specification I mentioned, the JSON API specification. This is used to communicate, obviously, with Signals, and ultimately, everything you actually do within the user interface of Signals is actually backed by these APIs. So pretty much anything you can do as an end user inside of the SaaS platform, you can also accomplish with APIs. The next piece and a key piece in the demonstrations that Lily will show off here are external actions. This is a way for Signals to send basic information out of Signals, so you can add buttons for end users to click, which send off basic information to a customer's external applications. From there, they can utilize the APIs to grab more information about where the request came from, create powerful workflows, things like sample registration, which you'll see in the demo ahead, and a variety of other things that may need the end user to take some actions in an external application. Next, we have external notifications. Sorry, not next slide. Yeah, the next piece is the external notifications. This is very similar to what you would expect out of a webhook. This is where we have a handful of events that you can subscribe to. We can send off, when these events are triggered, we can send off basic information to an external service, which can trigger automated workflows. This is often used with things such as responding to an experiment being closed. You can send off that event and have your system begin a process where you archive the results of that experiment, whether it's as a PDF or just from specific content within the experiment. You generally will grab that kind of information and or download the PDF via the API. And then lastly, within Signals, we have external lists and data sources. So this is the option to allow Signals to pull data from your external services that are well formatted for Signals, which can be used as table items. So you can have a key and look up specific data from an external table so that you can keep that table up to date externally and have Signals use it as a lookup. And with that, there's also lists. So if you have an externally hosted list of something like a project code or a specific type of lab species or something that you were doing work on, that you want to regularly update the list, Signals can grab that data from the list on regular cadences in order to stay up to date with what you are currently listing. So if you've added new project codes, it can be synced either manually or on a regular cadence. So we'll go into a little bit more detail on each of these here with the next slide. First, as I mentioned, is the API. The API is documented in Swagger. What you see on the right is a very small subsection of what is available via Swagger. In Swagger, there's detailed technical details. It gives you details on the parameters used, as well as examples that you can use and actually even try out right there on the Swagger page to see what the request and responses look like. And as mentioned before, our APIs request and responses are based on the JSON API standard. So it's a way of organizing data to be streamlined and efficient in terms of response size and the relationships between the data that you're interested in capturing or sending. And we have a few different methods of authenticating. You can use API key. This is generally used in server-to-server interactions where there is no end user. So this would be something like driving a compliance dashboard, which you'll see in the demo from Lilly. And then there's also OAuth token exchange. This is bearer token exchange, which allows end users to authenticate and give permission to use their themselves as the user for these API calls. So if it would be based on their permissions, which allows controlled access and specific actions to be taken by users, not to a generic API key. This would be if you need to do something in these external actions. We often see this where we want to capture who is updating these tables and have it reflected in the audit log correctly as the user. And so if you use the bearer token exchange and use the OAuth tokens, you can actually authenticate as users, and all the APIs will respond as with only the information available to that user. The APIs are the core piece of technology used for all integrations, but they are often used and essentially always used in hand-in-hand with our next set of pieces that we discussed. So we can go to the next slide. As mentioned, this is a very, very basic architecture of what the integration with an external action might be. These are set up by an administrator. You set up a URL to send the identifying information to. So this is often a very basic identifier, such as an ID for an experiment, which can be used with our APIs to look up additional information and use that information within your external integration. Again, these are used to enable those custom workflows and extend functionality for specific use cases that customers need. And so you can see on the right, this is very simple. We send external action is enacted from within Signals. It gets sent to a customer integration. This could be a customer project code lookup site. So you may have a large list of project codes that you need to be able to filter on or do other kind of advanced search on. And it may be best to do that outside of Signals itself. And so the customer project lookup site would allow you to do that. And then ultimately, once the end user has selected the project code that they're using, it can be sent back to Signals. This is also will be used heavily by Lilly in the demo. So other examples, as I mentioned, would be any kind of external data lookup and import, where you may need to have the user take a couple actions to find the data they're looking for before sending it back into Signals. And then also, which we'll see, is this sample or material registration. So if you need to register samples that are being used within Signals in external databases. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, there's external notifications, which are essentially webhooks. They're configurable for specific events. So there's creation events and closing events are very highly used. So there'd be things where, if an experiment is created, you may want to track that it was created so you can get up-to-date data on whether it's been worked on, whether it's when the last time it was modified for compliance reasons. So these kind of situations where it would be when you enable these notifications for creation, we'll send them off at the time of the experiment we created. Your notification handler, which you've set up, may ask for a little bit more details. We'll send those details back to the as part of the response there, and then you can use those to write to your compliance dashboard. Other things we see often is more so on the end of an experiment's life cycle, where you'll see an experiment closed. This will trigger a notification saying, hey, we saw this experiment closed. You look up additional details that you're interested in about that experiment, and then you may decide that it is something you want to archive, and you can request through the API, you can request a PDF of that experiment to be downloaded and saved into your archive. So very common use cases and just another building block in the overall ecosystem of our integrations. And the next slide, please. And lastly, you'll see here where you can use external data sources and lists to provide options within Signals itself. These are configured by your admins. The data that you're sending back needs to be well formed. You can see on the right a very basic example of what a inventory system data might come back through, and you can use it as a data source within Signals. And you'll see in the small GIF playing that I'm going through and looking up the information as you see on the right directly from Signals, and this would be hosted in your external source. So you can use this as live data, and that data source regardless of the state of that data source, Signals will grab from it directly. So very useful for maintaining your data outside of Signals while still giving access to it within inside of Signals. So these are the core building blocks of what our customers have available to them for extending the power of Signals. Lilly is going to graciously present us with some real world cases where they go and use components that we just discussed to accomplish the needs that they have. So with that, I will hand this over to Douglas, and I believe he will take it from here.
Thanks, Colin. If we can move to the next slide.
Oh, sorry, I had one small thing. Forgot I had another slide here. No, next slide, please. This is a very, very basic overview of what this could look like. As I mentioned, all these pieces combined into one larger ecosystem where you interact with Signals through these with your external servers, whether this is external websites, just notification handling, data sources, but almost all of them are used by our customers while integrating into their digital lab to expand the power of their digital footprint. And now I will hand it off to Douglas.
Okay, so I will talk today about some of the integrations we've done with Signals Notebook at Lilly. Revity liked the idea of some of the things we've done and wanted me to share those. So if we could go to the next slide. So the first thing I'll talk about are the integrations that we included with our initial rollout. And so we built some of these in-house that our business required us to have before we moved from our old notebook system to this new solution. Those include molecule registration, some Lilly molecule searching and importing, and then we have a reaction data export also for an automation lab we have that they can then upload into their instruments to run reactions. So we'll also talk a little bit about what we built over time since the rollout, and this mainly deals with reporting, where we're using the API and the application together to build reports for compliance, productivity, project comparisons, and user and license tracking. So those are all going to the business leadership who've requested that for the most part. A few cases they're going to our CRO liaisons to kind of keep track of what's going on with the CROs as well. So next slide, I will talk about the registration integration we built first. And so we're using the external actions that Colin talked about. And you can see on the right-hand side, we just have GSM registration in there. It stands for Global Sample Management. And this is our link for doing this registration. So we have a structure as a requirement for this. If there is no structure for a certain compound, we have another way to register those, but that's not done through the integration with Signals. A lot number is also required. You can see down on the bottom. If none is entered though, we built it so we can use the Signals compound ID, which is produced for every product that's drawn. And so it can pull that instead if the lot number is blank, instead of returning an error. So what we do first is we select our external action. And then if we go to the next slide, I can show the Mixed Signals app. And so our external action opens this up and it uses the API to pull the information needed from Signals. So it's pulling in the structure, the name, the lot number, and I've got LSN kind of off the screen here because we're not pulling that at this point. So the user can then select which molecule to register, and there can be a list of products here that you can choose from. You can click on the register button then once you've made that selection, and this will send the information to the separate registration program that we use at Lilly. So next slide, please. So after we've done that registration, then we can come back to this window, what we call the Mixed Signals window, and we click on Retrieve LSNs. This will then use the API to go out to our registration database, and based on the lot number and some things behind the scenes that were recorded with the registration, it'll pull back the serial number for this compound on this page. So at this point then, I have the option to update my notebook page, and note that we've made this a decision that rests with the user. It's not automatic, so we never have anything automatically updating our notebook page. We always have the user having to hit a button to make sure that that's what they want to do and that it happens at that point. So if I click Update Signals here, on the next page, we can see, next page, please. Yes, thanks. On this page, then, we can see that it brings the Lilly serial number, the LSN, and the lot number back. And so this has our registration data, and we can then go forward with the reaction or close it out as we see. So this is all pushed back and forth via APIs. Starts with the external action and then all gets pushed back and forth. So basically the user sees they make an item selection in the menu, they click a box, they click a few buttons, and then when they come back here, the registration number is populated. So we tried to make it as simple for the users as possible while still being useful. Next page, please. So our next integration is import, and this works in much the same way. We're using an external action to open our mixed signals application again. And then what we can do there is search the Lilly proprietary database for compounds based on serial number or their structure. So we can also do structure and substructure searches here. Once this is searched, we see results like here, says a search complete, and we can select from those results. And then again, we can click add to signals. It's a user instigated action, which will then push that via the API back into our notebook page. And so in doing that, we can select any of these and it actually pushes it back as a reactant automatically. So we also have the export feature I talked about, and I won't show much here because basically it's an external action that opens that export. It's again pulling information from the API and it just generates kind of behind the scenes an XML from that reaction. The XML then is downloaded to the local computer and the XML is built to the specifications of our automation lab to show exactly what they need from the reaction. They can then upload that into their instruments and set up and start the reactions from that. So next page, please. So those are our mixed signals integrations that we had when we rolled out the service. We using the external action to call them and then using the API to push pull between signals, mixed signals, and other services. I've shown the diagram here, but we've already kind of talked through what happens. One important note is that we're actually using the authorization from the services themselves. So the global sample registration or the Lilly molecule service, we're using mixed signals to send the credentials. And if the person does not have access to those, it won't let them go out to register or do their searches for the Lilly molecules. So that way we didn't have to duplicate any kind of authorization within mixed signals itself or worry about that in signals. So those are our integrations we've done using the external actions. On the next screen now, we'll talk a little bit about some of the reports we've done. And so initially, I started building these reports using Power Query. If you were around for the intro, you might know that I came from the lab, so I didn't have a lot of experience with some of the more advanced API usage. And I essentially taught myself as I went through this, starting with Power Query and Excel. I built some of these, but it was kind of labor intensive to update and keep up with them. I then moved into KNIME, which we'll talk a little bit about on a later slide. This is great for building spreadsheet type reports, and it's very visual, building your workflow using different nodes. So I still use KNIME for some of the spreadsheet reports on productivity and things like that that our business users and leaders want. And I've since moved into Power BI, which is used when we want dashboards and either live or frequently updated data. So this has a direct connection to the API and can pull things from various sources and put it all together. So I want to note that I also looked at Spotfire. But as a quick win, I went with Power BI and KNIME in these cases because management and our quality areas weren't as familiar with that Spotfire platform. They already had the Power BI access, and so that is what I went with here. Still looking at Spotfire for the future for some of the scientists who actually use it more, but I don't have anything to present on that yet today. So next slide, please. So KNIME is this Constans information miner. It's a software application built by a company in Zurich. It's where they're headquartered, and we use it for quite a bit of different things at Lilly. So I used it quite a bit as a chemist to do a lot of predictions and things. I'm using it here to build my workflows to pull things from the API. So in the middle, I've got changes that I make monthly. Just in the yellow box there, I can change the months that I want to start and end. And then I go in and it creates my posts for me based on the things I have in the tables. That'll then go into running those post and get commands from the API to pull in drawings, pages, conceptions, users, and experiments and their states. Then I can go into compiling all of those, and I've got everything kind of condensed into meta nodes so that, as you see on the left there, the breakout example, there's a lot more nodes within each of the gray ones here. And then I bring those all together, combine them, compile them, subtract what we don't want to count. So we're counting the drawings in an experiment. So if there's more than one drawing, we're taking that as being one step and two steps within the same experiment page. Anything that's been voided, we remove from the productivity counts, and then conceptions are removed as well because they're not reactions that were run. So compiling those from the JSON, merging and adding the information and filtering, and then across the top, the various boxes there are writing Excel sheets for various management leaders in different parts of the company. Also bringing in the Lilly Worker Directory information kind of at the top left so that I can get that management info and I know how to filter it out because that's not something we keep in signals as part of the user information. So on the next slide, I've made this a little bit simpler and just talking about, we're looking at experiments per user per month. I will point out the management really isn't counting and looking at one person versus the other and saying this person didn't run as many experiments as this one did. It's more looking at the groups overall and just kind of keeping track of, okay, the group in Indy is doing this kind of work and our CRO is doing this kind of work. They can look at it between different projects, between different groups, etc. So it basically consists of 4 calls to the API. I'm doing 2 gets for the users and the drawings, and then 2 posts, which are the searches, looking for experiments that fit all of the different criteria. So next page, please. For compliance, something we're looking at is working with quality and our research leadership team. And they wanted a method for really monitoring different SOP compliance. And so we have a defined time for closing and signing experiments within so many days of opening an experiment and completing the data. You need to actually sign the experiment and close it out. And then we have so many days allowed between the signing for a reviewer to review it and countersign that. And this seems to be a classic problem for business quality everywhere, keeping on top of this. So we've had to work with, like I said, quality and the research lead team to really monitor these. I began with KNIME with a similar workflow to what we saw on the last few pages, and it was easy to build, but it required regular updates and a lot of interaction to really keep it up to date. So I moved that to Power BI with a direct signals connection through the API, which lets me update things automatically. So on the next page, we can see the different queries that I built in Power BI. And since the get function, there's limited offsets in a lot of these, and so you can only do so many calls at a time. I've actually used the functions within Power BI to create the lists And so I have a function to get the users. I also grab all the disabled users so that we can see if in the compliance report, things aren't being done, but then we can see, okay, this user's no longer in signals as well. So for the search functions, searching for things that are signed but not reviewed within 45 days, looking for things that are open and unedited. So an experiment's been opened, it's been sitting and actually not touched for more than 30 days or 60 days. We're pulling that information. Pulling information from either Excel or the Lilly Worker Directory database. So I can pull those directly, a little bit of information differently from each one. And then I'm also searching for things that a reviewer may have rejected, but then the original user has ignored and hasn't updated within 30 days. So this kind of gives us an idea of getting things signed and countersigned and up to compliance, which is a legal requirement for if we ever need to go into court and use these pages to uphold a patent. So next page, please. Again, I just broke down the queries and kind of how things work in a simpler flow chart here. We're doing one get to do the users. I'm doing 3 posts for looking at all the different kinds of searches that we want to do, combining all those, adding the Lilly info, and then I'm publishing that to the dashboard. So on the next page, we can see an example of the dashboard. And all of this data is fictitious. I just made it all up in our QA area to generate these slides. So in this dashboard, you can see we had 24 things that haven't been reviewed in 45 days. So that means the reviewers are slacking a little bit in their job. We have 30 days, 307 things that have been 30 days unedited, and 274 that have been out there for 60 days. So woefully out of compliance, most likely. I've got the updated time. So anytime a user comes into this, they can see when the last update was done. And then we're looking at, again, the things that were rejected and haven't been touched for more than 30 days. And also looking at how many of the 60-day unedited were by non-users. So people who are no longer in the system. And those usually have to be kicked to their management to get those closed out and done. So this is updated daily to show the compliance numbers at a glance. And then I have each box here linked to a details page because management doesn't just want to see, we have 24 of these outstanding. They want to see who those people are so they can go talk to them and get those fixed. So if I click one of these boxes, if we go to the next page, it shows an example of the report that we can get from that. And so for the review, I've got author and reviewer listed here. We've got their manager, a next level manager, and then the VP level. And so we've made all of these in Power BI clickable. So if I click on one name in this, it's going to filter the rest of the boxes to someone associated with that name only. So in the next slide, I've got a breakout example of that. And if I click the name in there by next level manager, then it's going to filter to that name in the next box at the bottom right and show only the authors that are reporting up through that manager, the one manager there may be and the VP they're under. So that lets our leaders kind of go through and click to see who's under them and who they need to go talk to really quickly. It's been a feature they've really, really liked to see. So next page, please. We've also got a user's dashboard that lets us just take a quick glance, and it's reporting users in Signals Notebook. And so we can see how many licenses we have in use, how many licenses are available, the total licenses we have in this environment. I also count the disabled user IDs so we can see how many users we've had either leaving the company or going to a different position. And then I'm also counting the availability of those licenses, as in we have 73 users in this fictitious example that are using Signals, using a license, but they haven't logged in for 90 days. And so I like to keep an idea of those. And if we start getting short on licenses, we can go in and remove some of those users. And we've also got the no log in for 180 days. And then I count people who have never logged in Usually I find the never logins to be people who are more in a management position, so they need that access to go in and look at some time, but maybe they got that account and just haven't used it. So again, we keep an eye on this, so we're making sure licenses aren't being wasted. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to show a little bit about the Swagger page and how we've used that. So again, I'm not a computer scientist, so I didn't have a lot of experience with the APIs. And these next few slides are just some tips on things that I used to really help me build these queries and get things into both KNIME and Power BI. So in the Swagger page, pretty much anybody can actually use this, and it only lets them search, well, I say anybody with a Signals license. And it's only going to let them search what their license would allow them to access within Signals itself. So I actually go into this and I can authorize it using an API key as well that'll let me search as an administrator. But I can build the search in here of the entities I want. And then over on the right, you get the example of what comes back. So for a simple query, I'll just use the Swagger page and get the JSON out. And that's usually pretty good. It gets me the information I need. I can load that into Excel or Power BI and just go from there. And then I use the Swagger document also to get the information, the headers, the request URLs, various things like that I might need to build my API queries in other platforms. The next slide, I show a little bit about how I use the application itself. And so I can go in and build pretty complicated searches with the Signal search tool. And then opening developer tools, Octavio from Revity has showed me how to go in and we can look at the combined users equal true and get the payload. And so this payload that I can copy then becomes the post body or the body of the post in a post command. And so this will let me go into even Swagger to run a post search, and I don't have to go in and build the thing myself. I can actually use this to help me get it out. So I think we're coming up to the end of it. Was the next slide the end? Or am I showing more? Yes. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Alicia to talk about some GXP integrations and different considerations we had for the validated platforms. Alicia, all yours.
Oh, thank you, Doug. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Alicia Hargreaves, and I am a senior IT manager and work with Doug and the Lilly Research Laboratory IT team at Lilly. For our Signals notebook in our area, we do have two instances that we support. There's a non-GXP version, and then there's a GXP instance that we also support, and that's the one that my team is responsible for. So working with Doug has been amazing. He supports the non-GXP side, and as you've seen, he's just done a lot of amazing integration work that has been extremely, I would say, informative and integral, and even developing those same integrations on the GXP side of things. And the only difference really being that because we're GXP, we do have to make additional considerations and validation decisions so that we remain GXP compliant, right? So today I like to talk to you guys really just about 3 areas of focus, high level, to consider when you're adding integrations to your GXP notebook. Next slide, please. Okay. So for the first consideration, I want to talk about timing, which is all about when. So when you're considering adding the integration, you have to look at really what time in your internal roadmap are you going to deploy it, as well as like when are you doing job scheduling, so when are these integrations going to run. Those are the timing pieces that I'm talking about. If we dig in a little bit more when we talk about the roadmap releases,
For example, what we do for our GXP instance is we do what's called a deferred release and then a post-deferred release schedule. So deferred releases are the releases we're receiving from Revity that are pushed to our production environment 3 times a year. So when that time is going on, we're really just trying to focus on those new features and getting those tested and validated so we remain GXP compliant. And then after that, and in between all of those deferred releases, we have post-deferred releases. And that's when we really just take time to focus on business requests where there's custom configurations for things like maybe experiment templates, as well as, of course, integrations. And so by being able to have these kind of separated and really refined in those areas, that breaks up capacity so that we can focus on those custom business needs like your integrations versus being concerned about missing your timeline and staying validated for your GXP version of the notebook. The second point I wanted to talk about is really partnership. So when you're making your connections with those external systems, it's really important, like from the beginning, to establish a very clear foundation with that integration team of your responsibilities and the roles between the two teams. How is that data going to be used? What's the data flow, where it's going to be stored? And then finally, just understanding, coordination of when you guys are having releases. So like I talked about before, on the timing side, right, we have our post-deferred and our deferred release schedule, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the integration team is running on that same timeline. So that is an example of just making sure that you guys are aligned about how you're going to work together. So, when you get into building that foundation, I would even recommend a document of understanding between the two groups. Make sure you're asking those questions about, for instance, again, what's their schedule? What's the major versus a minor upgrade? When they're having those changes, how does those impact the connections between the notebook and the integration, right? Is the system going to be down for a certain time? How do you communicate that out, right? Users are going to come to you first because they're going through Signal's notebook. So you need to also understand, what's their support structure. So those are just some really good things to get started when establishing your partnership with whatever your integration team may be. And then the last point I wanted to talk about is really security. So then building off of the partnership, once you've really communicated responsibilities between the team and the workflow that's going on, then you can use that information to really right size the privileges for that integration. For example, if you are working with the integration team that really just needs to view or print data, you don't need to give them system admin access, right, to the Signals API. You just need to have maybe uh, view access because that's all that they need. So it's really good to have that understanding so that you can give them, the least amount of privilege. And then from there, I also recommend making sure that you have a process for rotating your API keys, again, to ensure that security, that there's no bad actors or somebody using it improperly. This also is great as far as like using different API keys for your integrations. Signals allows you to have up to 10 API keys in your instance. So we make sure that for each one, we give them separate keys, and that really lets us refine the access control that we're giving each integration group. And then for the final 2 points, under security, just wanted to note as you're working with your integration teams, make sure that you have the right testing, or I guess right size testing for your Signals notebook. Because there's the integration team may not have that same level of validation needs as your Signal notebooks have. So it's important to understand the level of testing they're doing, and then also testing on your own end to make sure your integration set up correctly. They only have certain privileges, right, that are, as Doug spoke about before, that's allowing them to see the data that only they need to see. So that's important to do. And then another way you can ensure this is also by auditing those integrations. And what that just means is as you build those integrations out, setting up some type of reoccurring auditing activity to look at what that integration is doing. Is it just, for example, when we talk about printing, is it only printing, PDFs, versus is it posting things that it shouldn't be, or editing or deleting things? So we make sure that we audit all of our integrations on a reoccurring basis each year. So in summary, overall, if you're just working with your Signals notebook and it's in a GXP validated environment, or even if you're just considering it in the future, my advice is just to remember to have a focus on timing, partnership, and then security, because that's going to assist you with being able to plan ahead, aligning with your integration teams, and of course, protecting your data. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and of course, Colin and Doug, for your insightful presentations. Now we'll move straight into our Q&A session of the day. If you did not have a chance yet, please submit your questions through the question box located on the right-hand side of your screen. I will also have our speakers go ahead and turn on the webcam so we can see your beautiful faces for a highly anticipated Q&A session. So thank you. Perfect. Okay, so let's begin. We'll go with the first question here. For external data sources and external lists, is a form of buffering available if interactive access to external sources is too low?
There isn't currently. The timeouts right now for an external data source is 20 seconds, and for the external list is 30 seconds. This is done to preserve the user experience when utilizing these tools. So if your external source is taking longer than that, we will time out.
Perfect. This is again for Revity. Are there any plans to expand notifications for any type of any actions, inserts, updates, deletes? For many workflows, the notifications are too limiting and one needs to go with batch processing by modification dates instead of streaming.
Yeah, we are always looking to expand the availability of triggers for these notifications. Right now, I think our first next set will be more focused on materials, on their creation and deletion. But we are always looking into ways to improve our notifications. We always take it very cautiously, as we don't want to overwhelm the external systems we're sending these notifications to. So being a SaaS platform that is auto-saving all the time, we currently are not planning to do on every edit of an entity. That would be a lot of notifications. It could even just be scrolling your page and making a small change into a text box. But in terms of other key points of triggers, we are looking to expand them, and a lot of it is based on customer feedback and just our plans for future enhancements there.
Perfect. Thank you. I was wondering why the molecule registration happens from the products table and not the samples table. A product can have multiple samples which might differ, crude or different fractions and so forth. I believe this is for Doug.
Yeah, so we register our molecules at the molecule and lot level for the serial numbers we're getting. And then there is a separate system that kind of handles our samples and the sample management system with the barcodes and everything like that. So when we're not really recording each individual sample in the notebook, it's not something our scientists were used to doing in our old solution. So that's not something we carried forward to this one. So we're bringing it from the product table. Once it goes into our external registration system, so after the mixed signals, it goes into the system I didn't show. There is a place in there where people input their samples and barcodes and register them at that level. But yeah, since the information was not in signals, it's not something we built the integration to bring over.
Great. Now, Have you ever included an integration deployment within your deferred release schedule versus the post-release schedule? Oh, sorry, post-deferred release cadence?
Yeah, that has definitely happened. I think ideally, as I spoke about, as far as overview, those are things that you can keep separate. That is definitely ideal. But like all things, you may have a certain urgent project that comes up or anything, right, that changes scope of what you're doing at the time, whether it's post or it's deferred release. And so, in those particular cases, when we've had a post-deferred integration planned, and then that got moved into a deferred release point. The important thing was having that conversation of how does it impact our current scope of testing, right? Because we can't miss our deferred release. That's how we stay GXP compliant. So in those cases where we said, okay, you know what, something happened during the post deferred release schedule, can we add this to our deferred release schedule? We do an impact assessment to understand how that integration being added is going to overall impact that. And if it doesn't, or it's a low risk, then we'll add it. Otherwise, we'll just push it into the post deferred release that'll be after that. That way we don't endanger like any of our validation activities that we need to complete.
Great. Now, have you observed any resistance of the lab personnel to incorporate it into their normal routine?
I don't think we have. We tried to keep signals when we rolled it out to be as close to the previous solution as we had, so it was a seamless transition. And for the most part, you know, people have wanted these integrations, and so they are using them quite a bit. The ones I showed are mainly for chemistry, for our external action type integrations. The biologists have been a lot more quiet. They tend to just do their own thing and don't want to ask for changes. So, Alicia, have you seen anything along those lines?
No, we're very similar, especially with our background, right? Like you mentioned, coming from that older notebook, I think as we transitioned into Signals notebook, our users were already looking for that. And I think you shared that on kind of that first slide, that there were already those, hey, out the box, this is what we need to see, right? You know, in our release. And so our users were expecting that. So I would say there was no resistance versus like, we'd love to see those integrations included as we start to use Signals notebook.
Great. What tools have you seen customers use to host their external servers and scripts?
Yeah, that very much so depends on your IT organization. We see obviously lots of variety of uses of Amazon Web Services. I believe Lily even showed off a bit there, as well as Microsoft Azure. We see things like Google Cloud Platform. So it really does depend on your particular organization and the IT stack there. So.
Great. Does anyone with a license have access to Swagger?
Yep. Douglas actually, he mentioned this a bit in his presentation, but yes, anyone who has a license can get on the Swagger page via the URL. It's tied to your tenant. And as I've mentioned, it is going, like the responses they will see will be tied to their use permission. So if you don't have access to a particular set of data and you try to query it with an API, you'll get an unauthorized error. So it's a way to manage availability of specific information. And as Alicia also mentioned, similarly, how the APIs respond is that if you have very specific permission set up for a specific user who maybe have the API key associated with them, it will only return information that they actually have access to themselves.
Thank you. You mentioned that how the integration you built to look up samples from the notebook using the external action features uses the permissions in the sample registry to perform the lookup. If I use the external list data sources to look up sample information instead, can it also perform the queries using the current user's permissions?
So those are going to be sent from Signals itself. You can include a header. So you can include a header with an API key, but those will typically not be constrained by users. that it's going to be coming directly from signals, not based on the user.
Thank you. How do you determine the right level of privilege for an integration?
Yeah, so as I spoke about before on the security piece of that, when you're focusing on the right size of the integration, it goes back to that partnership. Digging a little bit more into that example I gave earlier, we have an integration where the focus is just to be able to print PDFs so that it's stored in one of our external applications so users can have read access to that data without having to log into Signal. In that case, there's no need for somebody to be able to add, delete, edit, or anything like that. And so when we understood with our partners the use case of what the data was going to be used for, how they like to see the data, we understood that the only action that was relevant was really being able to view and print certain experiments, right? And so based on that, we were able to only give them a limited amount of access for the account used to generate the API. And again, we also do an audit of that to ensure that that's happening. So we make sure our account only has the access that it needs, which we also test as well. So there's levels of testing of making sure that our roles and access function the way they're supposed to, and then implementing adding that access to the account roles that we're using to generate the APIs. And then we're also doing auditing to make sure that they're only doing what they're supposed to be doing based on our understanding of how the integration is set up.
Great. I don't fully understand the purpose of Swagger. Is this where you input data to feed into signals?
No, so the Swagger page is actually just documentation to explain how to use the APIs, from a technical side of things. So it's got information on how to set up your API requests. It has examples of how to do so, and further details on how to customize these requests to get the data you're interested in, or to feed the data in that you are interested in. But no, it is purely should be used as documentation and examples as a learning resource.
Great. So this is going to be the last question. What tools have you seen customers use to host their external servers and scripts?
I think that's a repeat question.
Yeah, I also. So I apologize.
As mentioned, it is a variety. It can be lots of them. I'd say the most common will be a variety of AWS services, or AWS, Amazon Web Services.
Okay, perfect. And do you have any current documentation on your point integrations?
Yeah, so there's obviously a Swagger page. That's going to be the primary source of information in terms of the actual API endpoints. There's also our system configuration guide, which is available to administrators of tenants, which has a significant amount of details on using the search, as well as other points of integration, such as how to set up an external action or an external notification. But also coming very soon is more of a user-friendly kind of guide towards, how to use these tools, not so much as how to set them up, but more so how to use them, some best practices that come around with them, and some practical examples on how you might actually go about it. So kind of stepping you through, this is what a sample registration flow might look like on the very basic level, so you can kind of inspire customers to, custom fit these kind of integrations to their own needs, and just kind of see what a fully, end-to-end example might look like in terms of what API requests were used, what data did you consume out of them, and what did you send back and forth. So that's coming very soon. Should be sometime next month. And that will be available to all customers, both existing and potential, when it's available.
Great, thank you so much. Well, thank you for that. We'll be ending the Q&A session for today. It looks like we're running a bit under, heading to our time now. So thank you so much for that Q&A session, Colin, Doug, and Alicia. Please note showcased are our upcoming Connect dates, as well as all relevant links for further inquiries. All links here are provided in the chat box on your right-hand side. So I will go ahead and have thank again Colin, Douglas, and Lisa. So you can go ahead and turn off your webcam. So thank you for installment of our 2024 Signals Notebook Connect Community Series focused on Signals Notebook. We'll have our next session on October 6th. So we hope you can join us then. More information to come. Reminder for all those who attended this presentation that you are already registered for the series, so no need to re-register for the upcoming sessions. In between sessions, you can stay up to date on Signals Notebook new features and functionalities via our What's New session of the website and email communications. And again, a big thank you to our fantastic speakers for today, Colin, Alicia, and for their insightful presentation and engaging Q&A session. Your expertise and willingness to share your knowledge with us is really, truly appreciated. So we'll address any pending questions in the upcoming days, as well as share this presentation. So I appreciate everyone's time for joining us today. Thank you.